While Stanley Kubrick was often guarded about the interpretation of his films, often refusing to comment on what they truly mean, he was actually pretty open about the meaning of A Clockwork Orange, willing to lay out his own philosophy on the nature of the world, saying things like, "The government eventually resorts to the employment of the cruelest and most violent members of the society to control everyone else. Not an altogether new or untried idea." In this sense, Alex's last line, "I was cured all right," might be seen in the same light as Dr. Strangelove's exit line, "Mein Führer, I can walk." The final images of Alex as the spoon-fed child of a corrupt totalitarian society, and Strangelove's rebirth after his miraculous recovery from a crippling disease, seem to work well both dramatically and as expressions of an idea. Well, in this kind of world, it's no wonder that there are some who still fiercely oppose the government, or at least the new regime. The character of the writer represents an influential liberal in a world where liberalism is slowly dying. He is a humanitarian, incredibly kind, charitable, and benevolent, going so far as taking people who are in need into his home. And ultimately his goal is to defend the great traditions of liberty. At least this is how he seems at first. When Alex is beaten by the police, the writer takes him in and cares for him, although it becomes apparent that his motives are not completely altruistic. He intends to utilize Alex for political purposes against the government, using him as an example that proves to the public how barbaric the new regime is, thus casting them in a negative light, with the hopes that the new regime will be voted out of power in the upcoming election.
This young boy is a living witness to these diabolical proposals. The people, the common people, must know, must see. There are great traditions of liberty to defend. The tradition of liberty is all.
Now, in any other dystopian tale, the writer would have all the makings of a freedom-fighting hero, if only it weren't for the fact that his methods aren't as freedom-loving as he might like to believe. In fact, he is overtly manipulative, and for Kubrick, the writer's manipulative intentions put him on equal footing with the manipulative government he is fighting against. Kubrick said in an interview that, "In the political world of A Clockwork Orange, the minister, played by Anthony Sharp, is clearly a figure of the right. The writer, Patrick McGee, is a lunatic of the left. The common people must be led, driven, pushed," he pants into the telephone. "They will sell their liberty for an easier life." The interviewer points out that these could be the very words of a fascist. And Kubrick responds, "Yes, of course. They differ only in their dogma. Their means and ends are hardly distinguishable." Obviously, Kubrick was a fan of contradictions and paradoxes, and this is perhaps among the most uncomfortable contradictions in his body of work, not least because it has such startling real-world implications. If you are someone who loves liberty, how can you free people who do not want to be free? If people will sell their liberty for an easier life, does it make you an authoritarian if you want to force liberty on them? While not every liberal is a lunatic of the left like the writer, A Clockwork Orange does pose a unique philosophical problem for the liberal or the libertarian who is living in a democratic system that is gradually becoming totalitarian. How do you fight for freedom when the people freely want authoritarianism? This question is never really answered. Instead, Anthony Burgess, the author of the novel itself, simply says that A Clockwork Orange is, ominously, the dream of liberalism going mad, and it is a madness for which we are never given a cure. We are simply left with a nightmare of kindness that opens the door to strangers and gets brutally assaulted. A horribly lucid dream of mercy that fights for the rights of criminals, but when the crime is committed against them, they exact a more cruel vengeance. It was C.S. Lewis who presciently asked, "Are we not really an increasingly cruel age?" Perhaps we are, but I think we have become so in an attempt to reduce all virtues to kindness. For Plato rightly taught that virtue is one. You cannot be kind unless you have all the other virtues. If being cowardly, conceited, and slothful, you have never yet done a fellow creature great mischief, that is only because your neighbor's welfare has not yet happened to conflict with your safety, self-approval, or ease. Every vice leads to cruelty. Even a good emotion, pity, if not controlled by charity and justice, leads through anger to cruelty. Most atrocities are stimulated by accounts of the enemy's atrocities, and pity for the oppressed classes, when separated from the moral law as a whole, leads by a very natural process to the unremitting brutalities of a reign of terror.